I'm not saying the point.
I don't care who's in the office. I mean,
his angle on how he's educating is really interesting.
It's magnificent.
A lot of stuff he's saying is not true.
Personality.
I went to a meeting and it was just like, yeah, that's it.
You know what I'm saying? Anyway, she got a job as one of Michelle Obama's representatives. Yeah, I wanted to say that, you know.
That's why I wanted to make these stores.
Around
There's so many people that want to develop, they want to make their own business.
I would sign up. As much as I don't like it, I would sign
I
up.
feel like education is always a triumph. It's so growth.
Places you would go,
And people were like moving fast, like
a really good conversation.
really trying to kind of like. It's almost like it was just like people trying to manipulate these early stages.
Yes.
Downtown?
The old house? Yeah.
Trying to
We're in a new building now.
now.
Yeah. We've been there 2 years.
I'd have eaten piece of cheese and tater tots.
Yeah.
I just wanted, this is the first time here, you know. I knew I get on your nerves about crypto and blockchain. I talk to her about it all the time. But I know that she is taking stuff in. Yeah, she listens. And what she does, I mean, it's all data. I'm like, it's a no-brainer that your company, or the companies that you work for, will utilize this technology.
That's my job.
Early, take
So
advantage
they
of
don't have to do that. That's what I did. It's pretty dope.
I mean, yeah, everything is going to shift to corporate adoption somehow. I think a lot of it will kind of be on the back end. People don't really be aware of it. And that's kind of how most people end up getting onboarded. A lot of people get onboarded and not even know. But it's kind of like that whole Wi-Fi thing, right? Like, no one really like knows.
You're on the shop.
Yeah. Like, using these way. Versus like 20 years ago, you kind of had to be like, retailer savvy to the Amazon, like on the customer side of the internet. Those were like, okay, yeah, 2000, no, maybe like 25 years ago.
Say the price.
What is had to be kind of like, yeah, you had to be kind of deep into it to use the internet. Yeah. The average person was not using the internet. Now, so I see the similar thing happening with
So Eric, who's speaking with me tonight,
blockchain. And it's so many different like
I want you to make Eric know what's over here. Yeah. So, are you familiar with LGMI? No, it's they make digital signage boards. It's let's see. It's not on Shiloh, it's on Shiloh East. It's behind it. We are on Shiloh East. Are you? Okay. Well, LGMI is behind Shiloh East. That's his product. But he started meeting up with us.
I'm like, a lot of people are also forgetting that there's utility behind it with the on-demand liquidity. That's being used right now as we speak. So that could be also another thing, is that they're probably starting to slowly ramp it up. You know, I don't think they're going to just turn everything on. The price looks like it's ready to stop. But I think they're going to slowly increase the volume to make sure that their systems will handle it. And they'll
watching company
do it.
when you come in on Shiloh, it was like the third or fourth building
Let's see what happens.
left hand side. There's a white office building. They're not there anymore, but I was they had a electrical thing set. There was a live demo of how blockchain moved through a logistics system. Pretty cool.
To be precise.
When I think of building down Shiloh, I think of that, so that's what I'm trying to.
All right. Secretary, you start to say
Yeah. Well, condo, the fact that you own it, it's inside the. Yeah. Yeah.
There you have other water speakers.
We've known each other for He told one of the funniest stories I've ever heard. Something to do with a bicycle and he remembers.
Yeah, I'm sure.
How you doing, man?
Good, man. Congratulations. Congratulations.
I think I'm in the center.
Yeah.
How y'all been? Good. You want to put me in the middle?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I figured.
We're going to go to you first, guy, to introduce Foresight.
Yeah, okay.
Feel free to take a seat anywhere where it's comfortable. Yeah, so Chris, if you wanna just go.
Okay. That works? Yeah. Yeah, all right. Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
My head like right in the way. Yeah, that's all right. Not too bad.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks. I'm the blocker.
That's good.
Sorry about that, James.
Thanks, sir. Yep. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Marlon, founder of ABC, Atlanta Blockchain Center. We, as you guys know, are trying to be one of the catalysts for Atlanta's emergence as a blockchain hub, right? So we appreciate our speakers today for agreeing to come and share your amazing expertise with the community, and I'll let Tarek get this thing going.
Yeah, so just want to welcome everybody for coming. How's everybody doing this week?
Let's go.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, hope it'll get even better now that you're here at the Blockchain Center. So basically, we're a co-working space and also a community center. So 7 days a week, we offer our space up to anybody that's building and working in blockchain to use this place as just somewhere away from home, rather than just, we got so used to working remotely. Let's kind of all get together in one communal area and just kind of work together. And we've actually found that some people that come here and work, even though they're working on two separate things, they end up coming back and they're working on something together. And that's kind of what we want to foster here in Atlanta. Some things that we also have going on here is we act as a community center. So on event days, we open up the center to anybody that wants to come before the event, like today. We leave the doors unlocked. If you want to come work before the event, beat traffic, this is a place for you. We also have an incubator here where we want to incubate projects that are looking for funding within the Web3 space, want to transition from Web 2 to Web 3. You just want to join a hype train, pretty much. So we're incubating 3 projects right now. And then we're also planning next year, we're going to be planning our first conference. It's going to be the biggest conference you've seen in Atlanta, called a Mutable Conference. And if you want to get more information about that, check us out at atlantachain.io. So what you're sitting here today is Off the Chain Thursdays. We do this thing every week since we've launched. We have 4 themes, and today's theme is actually blockchain in our world, use cases for a distributed ledger. This week's topic, which these speakers will be talking about today, is entrepreneurial opportunities along the supply of blockchain. So I just want to kick it off by introducing our speakers. So starting from right to left, we have Christopher Davis, who is a Supply Chain Council Chair for the Georgia Blockchain Coalition and the founding principal of GoBlock USA. In the middle, we have Eric Hornsby, who's the CEO of SmartPoint, scalable data center on the sidewalk designed to meet the growing demand for, it's kind of long, but he'll give you the rundown. But he's very, very important, very special. We're glad to have him. And then on our left, we have Scott Evans, who's the senior project manager for the Buckhead County Chamber of Commerce. And with that being said, I want to kick it off and enjoy the event.
All right, well, thank you very much. I'll start. Again, my name is Chris Davis. I'm the founding member, along with Ron there in the back, of a company called GoBlock. We're a supply chain consultancy, more in the traditional supply chain space. But in 2018, we started playing with blockchain and supply chain. We've kind of been doing it ever since. Also part of the Georgia Blockchain Coalition. And one of our missions is to again, connect the community in Georgia around all things blockchain, right? I particular, my specialty is in the supply chain, so I also lead the Supply Chain Council, which is trying to bring together the traditional supply chain space of robotics and transportation, those types of things with blockchain. And so that's why we're kind of hosting this tonight, is to kind of bring those two together. And I'll be your facilitator. And really, we want to talk about the project these two guys are doing. So Scott, take a little more time to introduce yourself and SmartPoint and what you're doing there.
Chamber, SmartPoint.
I'm sorry, Eric. Yeah, you were supposed to sit here, and he was supposed to sit there. So Eric, yeah, go ahead.
So, hey everyone, I'm Eric Hornsby. I'm a co-founder and chief executive officer of a company called SmartPoint IO. The IO in SmartPoint stands for Input Output. We are a data center infrastructure edge computing company. So we focus on physical infrastructure placed in high foot traffic areas, typically on sidewalks and transit venues. We were born out of an advertising sales motion, so think out-of-home media. We've transformed that into, like I talked about, an edge computing node where we deploy that, and we specialize in hosting latency intolerant application workloads there and providing connectivity for edge applications to operate at the edge.
We're going to dig into your project a little bit later. And
Sure.
So Scott, then introduce Forsyth and yourself.
Sure. So most of you probably know Forsyth County is a county just north of Fulton. We're right on the Lake Lanier, so we're kind of where the technology, you'll see it probably starting next week, but we've got the Georgia legislature to name Georgia 400 as the technology corridor. The reason is if you go from Cumming to Johns Creek to Milton, it has the highest concentration of technology workers in the state of Georgia. It's the same concentration that you have around Georgia Tech, except there's 4 square miles around Georgia Tech. We've got 75 square miles up there. And so what we've learned is there's 73,000 people that leave Forsyth County and drive down 400 to go to the more higher paying jobs. So 5 years ago, they reached out to me, and because I've been a part of 8 different startups, they asked me if I would help start a outreach to recruit more tech companies. And so at the time, I thought it was a great idea. And so we came up with a 5-year economic development plan. How do we actually go out and recruit tech companies? Part of it, and the reason that Eric and I became friends, I met Eric on my second day. Not just Eric was working for another company, but this is a perfect example. We either recruit companies here or we don't incubate when you think of incubation in terms of a place like this. But we help companies succeed by connecting them, because if Eric were to take his company somewhere else, then we've lost those jobs that could have been created here. So, I do what I can. Eric's my friend, but also, he's a company that we're trying to help foster. I go to trade shows mainly through the United States to recruit companies, but also I work with companies like Eric's to help them foster and bring them resources that can grow, and hopefully if I make him successful, he stays in our community.
And y'all are working on a project up in Forsyth that we'll talk about today.
Yeah, we'll come back to the details of that in just a minute, but that's a perfect example. I mean, I kind of jokingly, we know what the oldest industry in the world is. Banking is the second oldest industry. Well, economic development, which is what I do, is like the third oldest industry. There's no disruption whatsoever. Everybody does the same thing all the same way. And the reason that I guess they brought me into it is because, I come from it at a different angle. Instead of doing what everybody else does, I like to do it in an opposite direction. And so I've come up with a concept, gamification of economic development. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but we're using Eric's technology as the platform for a competition that we're hosting.
Awesome. All right, so before we kind of get into the specifics of what y'all are doing and developing up there, we thought it might take a moment just to kind of level set on what do we mean is supply chain, right? And talk a bit about, why is blockchain even applicable to supply chain? And so let's just take a couple minutes to really level set there and kind of groundwork. And as most people know, supply chain is hot right now, right? It's super hot. It's super buzzy. I mean, who hasn't heard the word supply chain besides this thing? Who hasn't heard the word supply chain in the last 2 weeks? Raise your hand if you haven't heard supply chain. Raise your hand if you have heard of supply chain. Right? It's everywhere. Inflation, whatever. It's like some of the buzzwords of today. So it is super hot. And just I saw the stat the other day that last year in 2021, $5 trillion was spent worldwide on supply chain. And there's also lots of pain points, right? Lots of problems to be solved. So you've got this really big industry with lots of pain points, and we're all entrepreneurs and go, wow, hey, that sounds kind of cool. That's an industry I might like to be in. When you talk about blockchain and supply chain, though, it is not hot. It is not. No one's talking about it much at all. It really has very much cooled off. I wanted to show you this. This is by a company called Gartner, and Gartner is an industry analyst. They go through all these different industries and do all this analysts, and they have this thing called the hype cycle. Right, and this is their curve for hype cycle. When you start here, and they said that any new innovation that you do comes through this hype cycle. So it starts here with the innovation trigger, then it gets super hyped up at the peak of inflation, and then it comes down through the trough of disillusionment, and then kind of settles out and becomes accepted. And if this is the 2021 one, and Gartner put blockchain and transportation, logistics, transportation up there at the top, super hyped up, right? Peak of expectations and. You go, it's just going to go down in the trough of disillusionment, right? It's going to get unhyped. And so when this came out, the next version came out in 2022, which was just a couple months ago. I was expecting to see it down here. Well, guess what? Gartner pulled it completely off. They said, we're not even going to put it on the hype cycle. The market is very fragmented and very immature, right? And so they said, nothing's happening in blockchain, in supply chain. And I completely agree with that as well. And you first look at this and go, well, that sucks. But really think about it, you've got a super fragmented market with no major players, consolidated players, in a $5 trillion industry that has a lot of problems. How often do you run across an opportunity, a market, where there's a lot of money and not a lot of consolidated players? Imagine if someone was to come to you today and say, I'm going to start the next Coinbase. I want to start the next FTX. You go, dude, very already consolidated, multiple players already there, there's not a space for it. But if you were to gauge 6 or 7 years ago and someone say, hey, I've got this idea called Coinbase, right? So you would say, yeah, it's great, because there weren't many players back then. I think Mt. Gox or something like that. Maybe 12. So this is a very unfragmented, very fragmented, unconsolidated. There's not a lot of players in this market, and that's the whole story for the day. If you walk away with one thing, think about the opportunities that blockchain and supply chain provide. And so let's talk about, at least for the purposes of this conversation today, when these guys talk about their project, what do we mean by supply chain? Because lots of people can have different definitions, right? And there are lots of different definitions depending on what you're trying to do. Let's define it for here today. But I want to ask you guys, when you think of supply chain, just yell out, what do you think of? What's the definition of supply chain to you? Just yell it out. Don't have to raise your hand.
Trucks.
UPS.
UPS, moving stuff, right?
Trains.
Huh?
Trains.
Trucks, trains, UPS.
From A to B.
From A to B.
Manufacturing.
Tracking.
Box.
Here we go. Good brainstorming session. This is awesome. Yeah. Exactly, right?
And Suez Canal.
9 out of 10 of those were, hey, moving something physically from point A to point B, right? And that's what most people think about, because that really is what supply chain is when it comes down to a basic, right? You have to move something from where it started to where it ended. I like this definition of supply chain, and this comes from the Association for Supply Chain Management. They obviously do a lot of work in supply chain thought, but it's a global network. That makes sense, right? Moving things around the globe. Used to deliver products, which we just talked about, and services, raw materials to end customers through flow of information, physical distribution, and cash, right? And we talked a lot about the physical distribution, right? When we were brainstorming, a lot of people said physical distribution. But a true supply chain also has to move the information and also has to move the cash. Logistics, exactly. Physical logistics, cash, and information. And so the reason I've underlined information and cash is because whenever you talk about information in cash, I think, well, blockchain. What does a blockchain do? It stores information, it moves information, and doesn't move cash, it moves crypto or digital assets, right? So this is one of the reasons I believe there's a big play for blockchain in supply chain, is when we talk about the information aspect and the cash aspect, right? So let's talk for a second here about let's do a simple supply chain. Let's just go through a simple supply chain. You are a t-shirt manufacturer, right? And so you buy the cotton sheets from a supplier. You then sew it to small, medium, extra large, whatever, and print it, right? You print your t-shirts. And then you're really lucky in that you got a big deal with Walmart, which, by the way, is huge, right? Because now you're in 10,000 stores or whatever. So you've got a supplier of the cotton sheets, you've got to make and sew, and you've got to then sell it to Walmart, and that you physically move that product on the supply chain. But we also have to move the information, right? So you have to get the information from your cotton sheet supplier. When's the truck going to show up? How much am I getting? Pricing, all that. Same thing with Walmart. You have to tell them. And by the way, Walmart's super picky about what you have to tell them, right? Because they want it in a certain format. You're very familiar with this, just even buying from like Amazon or online, right? You get the email, hey, your order's been placed, your order's been shipped, your order's been delivered, right? They give you information along with the physical product. And then backwards through the supply chain, you then have to move these payments, this cash, right? Walmart has to pay you, you have to pay the supplier. So that's when we talk about moving physical information and payments. Does it make sense so far? All right, let's take one more step, and let's just go a little more complex. I think I hit the button twice. So if you take your own supply chain there. This cotton supplier, they also have their own supply chain, right? You get the textile mill, and you go all the way back to the cotton farmer that's growing it, baling it for shipment. They're weaving it in the textile mill before it gets to you. You send it to Walmart, and Walmart, they have their own different supply chain. They have to go through their distribution center. They distribute to their stores. Then finally, the customer comes in or buys online, right? And they pick it up or deliver or however before it finally gets to the home. And so even in this simple example, you can begin to see these multiple iterations of just how complex supply chain can be and how many players there are. That's key. And how much, where the physical goods have to move and the information flows have to move and the cash has to move back. Now, the messed up part about this is that all of this is disjointed. All of the physical flows and the information flows are disjointed. It's on paper. It doesn't flow together. In fact, there's lots of anecdotes out there about how boats coming across from Europe and the States, the physical product makes it here before the paper, before the information. And it can't just sit because it can't move. And so we can get physical products here faster than we can get information. And then the cash moves back as a whole different cycle, right? Lots of different banks, lots of different people that have to be involved. And it's broken. It takes a long time. And in fact, the people, listen, if you were to plot wealth, like across the world, where the wealthy people reside, and where do the kind of the emerging poor people reside?
The wealthy sit just before the customer, just before the end.
Wealth is on that side, you're saying, right? And kind of the non-wealthy, the emerging is over on this side, right? Mm-hmm. These are the farmers in the different developing countries. And one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons is that as this cash moves back through the supply chain, everyone takes a cut, right? It has to move, takes a cut, gets transferred, and so there's less cash back here for them to buy their seeds. And so I believe that one of the things that blockchain can do is help solve some of this wealth disparity, right? And cut out some of these middlemen. And obviously, I was speaking to the choir here. We all know that blockchains can move money much more efficient. Right? So check out a company, we don't talk about it here, but check out a company called BanQu, B-A-N-Q-U, like bank, but B-A-N-Q-U. They are starting to develop some cool blockchain technology, real simple cell phone to help farmers in Africa and other folks help bridge this gap. But that to me is one of the best use cases in blockchain in supply chain. All right, one more business case. Why should we be doing this? And then we'll get to these guys' project. Is the Blockchain and Transportation Alliance, the Standards Council, back in 2017 says that every single day there's $140 billion tied up in freight payments disputes. $140 billion. Imagine if you were to solve 1% of that. Just 1%. Don't have to solve 20% of it. 1%, that's a $1.4 billion solution right there, that 1%. And that's just one data point. That's just one pain point. Right? That's just freight payments. There's lots of stuff going on in supply chain. Allied Market Research, they predicted back in 2020 that the blockchain and supply chain space that we're talking about today would be about $10 billion. $10 billion. Now, I don't think it's going to be that big. Some things by 2025, some things have changed, and as we talked about, we dropped off the hot cycle. But what if it's even 4 billion, 5 billion? The point is, as we started this, there's a lot of money in this space, right? And there's a lot of opportunity in this space for entrepreneurs, and that's what we call this: opportunities for entrepreneurs in supply chain and blockchain. All right, so let's talk about what these guys are doing, and we're going to frame it up. This is a lot on here. We're not going to go through all this, but we're going to frame it up where these guys are playing in the blockchain and supply chain space. So Globach developed this thing we call the ecosystem, and break it down real simply. We've got supply chain users at one border of the ecosystem, and these are where your applications sit. So these are like the producers and the manufacturers. They're using things like ERPs and DApps and so forth. They're feeding information into the ecosystem. And then you got this real life down here. These are customers that are paying and pricing for products. You got oracles providing real life information. You got IoTs and machines providing real life information right into the ecosystem as well. And that information then goes into the data stack or the blockchains, right? Which is internet, layer 1, layer 2, all those types of things I think a lot of us are familiar with. And then that information is fed into these use cases. So take a second to talk about these use cases. We've got plan, source, make, deliver, and return. That's a model that's used by the Association of Supply Chain Management. We talked about source, we talked about make, and we talked about deliver in our t-shirt example, right? Your source is the cotton sheet, you're making, you're sewing and printing, and then you're delivering to Walmart. We didn't talk about plan, and we didn't talk about return. And we can't today. We could talk forever about this, but we can't today. But the key is that we had these use cases underneath each one of these parts of the supply chain, right? These use cases do exist, and I could spend hours talking about each one of these things, right? So these use cases do exist. So one of the things I'd like to offer up is that if you are interested in getting into blockchain and supply chain, and you want to begin exploring some of these use cases, just reach out. We'd be happy to go through these and talk about ones that you might be interested in. Lots of them already exist. The ones we're going to talk about today is, again, Eric's company is putting IoTs, right? IoT machines out in infrastructure with municipalities and using that information to provide to these kind of use cases under the deliver, which is transportation, digitization, shipment tracking, product monitoring, and so forth. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Class is over on that one. There's no class. We need to kind of groundwork where we're at. This is going to be, you guys are going to talk about the project you're doing. We would like to have a question and answer session as we go. Like, we'll have questions at the end, but please, if you just as we go, if you have a question, bring it up, right? How much time do we got left?
Until 8.
All right, we're doing pretty good. Okay, very good. So, Scott, back to you. Talk again about Forsyth County, and you talked about this tech corridor.
Yep.
Right, that Georgia created. But y'all are taking it a bit further. You're getting into blockchain and IoT, and what kind of, encouraged you guys to go beyond just traditional tech and getting things like blockchain and IoT?
Well, I had mentioned the research that we had done with Georgia Power, and we have the talent there. So if you're going to move a company, the number one resource that you ask for, do you have the talent that will support my company if I move it there? So we have, again, the highest concentration of technology talent living in Forsyth County. So when we put together our 5-year economic development plan, we knew technology was going to be key. But how do you define technology? And I get asked that question all the time, and I say as vaguely as possible, because you could be working in a healthcare company, but if you're creating software or you're even trying to be more efficient in your processes, you're using technology somewhere. And so we really haven't defined technology per se, but what they did allow me to do is add to, because we brought a consulting firm in to help us come up with a 5-year plan. But what they allow me to do is say, well, we don't want to go out and compete with Alpharetta, because Alpharetta is already known around the world as the fintech capital of the United States. But what we would like to do is add value to that, because we're just one exit up. A lot of people don't know this, but 1/3 of the Alpharetta zip code is actually in Forsyth County. It's 40% cheaper taxes. Just saying, one exit up. But if you want to work in Alpharetta, and that's important to you, then instead of being around the Milton area, you can come up to exit 12, McFarland Road. That's still Alpharetta. Jay's company, I talked to Jay a little while ago. Jay's company's there. But we chose to go after emerging technologies. And seriously, every time I've been a part of 8 different startups. I love change, but change is, even for me to love it, embrace it, it's still very, there's a lot of stress. And so one of the ways that I manage my stress is I want to learn a new skill. And so I had been on a project for 4 years. I really did turnarounds in my professional career. I just finished a big turnaround, and I've been out of the technology market for a little while. And so I was flipping through a magazine, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to start this technology thing with Forsyth County, but how do I want to change my, what new skill do I want to learn? So I picked up a magazine and I started hearing blockchain. I'm like, okay, I'll choose blockchain. Just randomly, it's just like that. So I started studying it, and so when the consultants came in and said, we're going to recommend you guys do emerging technologies, maybe blockchain. I'm like, hey, blockchain, I've been studying that personally. Now I can move a personal passion into my professional pursuits, and then we can build our budgets around that, and that's a great world for me. So I started meeting people just like you guys. When we started going through the slides earlier, I knew a lot of those people. It's a small community when you start getting people in a room like this. And so what I started learning was, if you put blockchain, AI, and IoT together, now you've got something. Blockchain in and of itself is disruptive. There's a lot of opportunity. But when you layer on top of it AI and IoT, then the world is your oyster. And so that became our focus in recruiting of technology companies, is companies working in those 3 technologies.
And how did you recruit them, or were you using this, the Department of Transportation as one of the vehicles? Talk a bit about your contest there.
Yeah, I had mentioned, and this is really kind of, Eric and I had been casually meeting, but Eric, working in another company, I invited him to be a keynote speaker to, I mentioned earlier, and I was saying it as a joke, facetiously, the oldest businesses and whatnot, but everybody in economic development, which is what I do, economic development is going out and recruiting of industry, they all do it the same way. And I'm not knocking them, but if I'm doing it the same way and I've got limited resources, because a lot of this comes from tax dollars, so you got very limited resources, how can you do it different? How can you do it better? So I started thinking, instead of me going knocking on doors, how can I get people coming to me? Because if you think about it, just imagine yourself as you're a CEO and you've got a $10 million company, and you're on the West Coast, but you want an East Coast office. It's very expensive. You're going to have to move your whole company. It's not a quick decision. You usually spend months, weeks, years sometimes, but you have to go and visit the place. It's a major commitment, even if you're just kind of kicking your tires. So I'm like, how can I get people to come to my place instead of me going and knocking on those doors and trying to find it? Because when I go to a trade show, like all of my other counterparts, and because we're frenemies, we all get together and we recruit to Georgia, and if we can get somebody on the hook, then we try to recruit them to our. That's where the competition starts. Is when we find somebody that's really moving, we want to recruit them to our business, our entity or our community. But if we can't get them to our community, then we at least want them in Georgia. So we all go as a delegation to a trade show. But we literally go to trade show booth, trade show booth, trade show. Are you growing? If so, you say yes. Oh, great. You want an office on the East Coast? Why don't you look at Atlanta? Why don't you come up to Cumming, Georgia? Here's my business card. So we all do that. That's very ineffective. So I thought to myself, what if we had a competition that we could take someone who might be interested and bring them through the competition to our area? So I'm skipping over a whole bunch, but I ran into the commissioner of Department of Transportation. We wanted to start an incubator in Forsyth, and I said to him, listen, most people think of asphalt and concrete as transportation, but what are you doing in technology? And so he's like, that's an interesting question. We've been asking ourselves that down at the office in Atlanta. And I'm like, listen, I want to start this incubator. Nobody knows really Forsyth. They're not on the radar in the tech world. We want to start an incubator up here. We want to come out of the, our debutante ball, if you will. But I said, what if we had a competition? And I would my agenda is very clear. I would like the marketing mileage of being able to say, I'm doing a competition with the Department of Transportation. That's it. I'm not asking for any money. I just want a use case, because we all know nothing happens in technology until you have a use case. What's your problem you're trying to solve? So he says, that's interesting. Let's talk about this. He gave me his card. So, call my secretary, get on my calendar. We'll invite you down. So 2 weeks I went down, and actually he brought me into his engineering department, met with his engineers, and he says, tell them what you just said, what you told me the other day. So again, skipping over a bunch, they gave me a use case. Because I told them, I said, you got 20, maybe 40 things that you want to solve for, but you've only got resources. Again, it's tax dollars. You've only got the resources for maybe the first 5 to 10. I said, but somewhere around 20, give me a use case. I'll take it up. I'll raise $5,000. It'll be beer money for tech grads, grads from University of North Georgia, University of Georgia. I'll host a competition. I'll raise the money. I'm not asking for money. I just want the use case and to be able to say, I'm doing something with the Department of Transportation. The Lieutenant Governor was pressing the Department of Transportation to put more technology, because ultimately when you put technology on top of a road, you get 40% more yield. Do you know how expensive it is to build a road? I've heard this as much as $20 million a mile.
When you say 40% more yield, does that mean like 40% more cars you get on that?
40% more traffic on a highway if you put technology on it.
Really?
So, yeah.
Interesting.
So
That's a pretty good use case.
yeah, and so over some. Do you have a question?
Could you give an example of that?
The metering. When you come up to the exits and the light, what that does is it allows the traffic that's actually already flowing. It staggers the cars to flow into it. That's just one.
And that's basic. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just basic. There's not a lot of tech even behind that.
When we get to Eric's project and idea, and start using AI, so they call it platooning, but they stagger cars. Let's say it doesn't. Atlanta's not a great example because our roads kind of meet like this and like this.
Yeah,
But if you think of New York, where they actually meet in latitude and longitude, they start platooning vehicles. They will hold them, and then they will let a group of cars go through all at one time, but not just one intersection. They'll go through like 5 or 6, and so they stagger that. You don't see it because you're looking at. You're blowing your horn at the car in front of you. Just go. But they actually, there's AI. If you add AI to that, the AI can see a lot further and say, well, if I hold these like 3 more seconds, there's 13 more cars that's going to go in this platoon.
Got it.
Oh, so anyway.
Well, would this be a good time to start talking about Eric's project, about his
No, I want to talk about this all night. This.
I knew. It'd be a good segue.
No, we'll bring Eric into it.
Eric, just sit down now.
No, we're gonna bring the chair over to him, because you're gonna wanna
Yeah,
show
right.
something, so you don't have to stand in the corner the whole time.
Are we gonna take him out of the camera?
Is he still in the camera?
Yeah, you have to be close.
Or we can,
You also made me think about the engineering of the streets as well, and like the
Yeah.
pathways. That's also a contributor.
Okay.
he's in the camera? Okay, we're good.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. The engineering of the street. You know, I can't get this whole concept, or I couldn't get this whole concept of the autonomous vehicle because I keep thinking of autonomous vehicle on the streets that we have now.
Right.
Some of this the streets have to be done differently. We're about to build, you've seen it in the paper, I think they shortlisted, but they're about to do a major widening of 400. Part of that's gonna be bus rapid
I thought they've been doing that for about 20 years.
the next phase of it. But we're gonna do something called bus rapid transit, so from probably the north, North Springs? North Springs? Yeah, so they're gonna do, manage traffic lanes, a lot of technology in that. So now you've got cars that can't do a whole lot, and so you could put autonomous vehicles on that.
It'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that, Des.
So let me, and I'll finish. That's how we came up with the first. We had an event. The DOT gave me. They said, "Well, we've been doing this pilot program called where we have 12 traffic lights, and the cars are beginning to talk with the traffic lights, meaning that they literally." And I saw the box. It's a homemade CPU, and they put receivers and transmissions into the I'm looking at that as though it's the traffic light, but the car can literally talk to that traffic light, and that traffic light will say, this light's going to turn in 5, 4, 3, and it'll tell you if you speed up, you can make the green light, or if you slow down just a little bit, then you'll hit that light when it turns green. And so those are the kind of things. So they gave me that use case and said, they basically gave me the data. And so what I went out to do, the lieutenant governor found out about this. He gave me $100,000.
Nice.
I never asked for $1. But instead of having seniors from Georgia Tech, University of North Georgia, and University of Georgia, it became an international contest. We got to use all the marketing resources of GDOT, and we blew this out across the world. And we got a company from Amsterdam come and participate in the competition. So 4 months later, we were in 2020, March, the world shut down. And so we never got to capitalize on, and we did this in 6 months.
Oh, wow.
We hosted an international hackathon in 6 months using GDOT's money that came from the lieutenant governor. And we never got to capitalize on it because the world went into quarantine.
And is this how you met Eric and your?
Well, I had asked Eric to be a keynote speaker because of his work with these boxes. We hadn't really got to. Why did I bring you into it? Because Eric and I had been brainstorming, and I'm saying that facetiously, because Eric had a vision beyond just the talking traffic lights. It was because that's where we got really into the weeds and. Let's put AI into this. Let's put blockchain into this. And so during the quarantine, this guy goes to work actually doing it. So I'll hush there, but.
Well, let's talk about your product now. If we've got a slide, if you want to show it.
Sure, yeah, pull it up. I think visually it's helps me tell the story a little better. So we're SmartPoint. SmartPoint is, as a legal entity, we're around 2 years in business. Formerly, I ran sales and served on the board of directors for a large joint venture company with LG Electronics. And so you can see from this picture, we've got a lot of digital signage-centric, product look. So we sold tens of thousands of digital signs intended to be outdoors in direct sunlight and on sidewalks, predominantly used for advertising. So our customers were people like Clear Channel and JC&Co. These are names of companies that you'll see at the bottom of a billboard. And again, advertising. So as we looked at how could we grow that business further, I ran sales, so constantly being asked how could we sell more product, perhaps we could make it cheaper, perhaps we could hire more salespeople, or we could make the product provide more value. And so that's that's the focus that I took, and we had a team look at, well, what else could we be doing in these really high value, real estate points of interest. So that product that looks like a digital sign houses, powers, and connects a server like you would find in a data center. We call it a multi-access edge compute node, or MEC is a commonly used acronym. They also will terminate to either a fiber backbone or they connect over high-speed wireless. So these take the application workloads, a lot of like what Scott was talking about. When you think about cars needing to communicate with one another, they can't necessarily just talk to each other. They need to have a way to get that data from one car to the next. It needs to be validated. That data needs to be cross-referenced and processed against things that are contextually relevant to the outcome you're seeking. So in talking traffic lights, the event Scott was referring to, where I was involved and supported those efforts, the Department of Transportation, as I talk, you're going to hear me focus a lot on outcomes. I love technology. I'm a technologist by trade, but the reason technology is deployed, it's budgeted for, and it's allowed is because it produces meaningful outcomes. It either generate revenue from an economic development standpoint, or it improves services, and particularly in cities. Some of those services that, again, Scott touched on, help with traffic flow, reduction of congestion, and one of the most important ones is improving safety. So one of the safety outcomes that we seek is to make what's called a vulnerable road user safer. So vulnerable road user would be a pedestrian in the crosswalk, someone using a scooter or a bicycle, things like that, not getting hit by a car. So when a camera up on a pole or what have you has a view of what's happening that perhaps your car cannot see, that camera view could be very helpful to you as a driver when your vision might be obstructed with a truck in front of you or going around a curve or what have you. So the ability for your car to receive a data insight about said obstruction and for it to be done in a meaningful way from a timing standpoint, all has to happen, not just securely, but it typically has to happen at the edge. And so the simplest version of this is camera sees object, camera tells edge compute node about what it sees. Not literally, but it provides that camera feed. Software on the compute node processes that camera feed looking for things that shouldn't be there, and then identifies an insight that should be shared with a validated technology endpoint, in this case being a connected car. So it's one use case amongst thousands of use cases that takes place at the edge of the network.
Eric, when you were explaining this to me a couple weeks ago,
Yep.
I just got fascinated by it. What I pictured is you've basically taken a big iPhone, put it on the street, right? And now I can interact with it, but I can also collect data, right?
Yep.
As you said, cameras, sensors. You can put humidity sensors in here. You can put all different environmental sensors. And so now we've got this iPhone out there collecting this data. Can we now write applications? Could I write an application to go on top of this and let me use your data, right, that you're collecting, like kind of like an Oracle, but then for lots of different things that people may have never dreamed up yet?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So decentralized applications are a major focus for us in our Web3 motion, business motion. So being a inherently physically decentralized edge infrastructure, right? Because we're not a data center full of servers. We are the equivalent of a data center physically spread out across a mesh networked community. So in seeking outcomes, like the safety outcomes, Scott and I are actually planning another competition where we'll have an outcome challenge, and the idea would be to have applications, either new or existing, compete for the greatest achievement of the desired outcome.
Gotcha.
But yes,
Gotcha.
this serves as a platform specifically for Web3, which when I think blockchain, I think really, two of the biggest things from a value add standpoint from blockchain are networking of commercially willing parties, people that want to conduct commerce together or produce an outcome together. So networking, and the other one is validation. Being able to take data points, just because that camera sees a bear in the crosswalk or an alligator or a goat or a person or whatever it is, well, how do I know that data is real? Under what system and why your system? So blockchain allows for this really amazing, incentivized, and fair way to validate that data and to report it back. So it's done consistently and really from a commercial standpoint, effectively. The validation of data on blockchain is extremely efficient, but also the networking of these parties is more efficient than it is for us in Web 2.
And I like to use the analogy. I was an executive, and I got one of the first smartphones. It was I was a big fan of the Nokia phones. To me, the Nokias were the best. And then they went to the Nokia smartphone, and it's where you had a stylus, and they tried to cram Microsoft Office inside of a phone. And so you do this thing, and then it died by the wayside because it had no ecosystem in it. Well, the brilliance of Steve Jobs was he allowed, we didn't know of a mobile economy or the mobile app economy until Steve Jobs brought it to us. So that's what this next competition is. The commissioner of the Department of Transportation was speaking at the Forsyth Chamber of Commerce at our transportation summit last year, and he says, hey man, because he came over afterwards and he says, hey man, I'm sorry, the world went into quarantine, we didn't get to capitalize on your last competition, you want to do something again? I said, yeah. He and I had already been talking. We want to do something in smarts. Talking traffic lights is passe now. We want to be out on the bleeding edge. We want, again, the marketing mileage, because I want to set up an ecosystem where people look at Forsyth County as the place to go to incubate these emerging technologies. So I said, yeah, we've been talking about smart cities. What do you think about that? He says, love it. Call my guys. You've got the relationships there. So my idea was to create gamification, do another competition, because Eric's product is actually, when we move into the 5G world, it's like the old television, the 4K televisions, reverse in that the infrastructure was here, but there was no 4K content. Well, there's a lot of people working in the 5G world, but there's no infrastructure to really run that across yet. He's got that. And so I'm trying to help him bring this to market. So just like the iPhone, we're going to host this competition in concert with partners GDOT, saying if you had this guy's technology, what kind of apps could you build on top of it to solve a certain use case? And the best idea wins a lot of money.
And these apps don't have to be blockchain apps, right?
No, I mean we want to create an app ecosystem on top of its edge computing platform.
And if these folks want to be involved in that competition, when is it? Any information?
Well, nobody's ever done anything like this, and because we're using, public infrastructure, there's a lot of, we're working through legalities. Peachtree Corners, the city of Peachtree Corners, Eric's already working on a project with them. They've already kind of created the new wheel of how to containerize personal identifiable information and keep that from being mismanaged, misused, if you will. So I'm working through the bureaucracy of Forsyth County government to get some deployments to where what we're going to do is we're going to put 7 of his devices around McFarland and Ronald Reagan, the Halcyon area, if you're familiar with that. There's a lot of vulnerable road users, a lot of cars, and so what we're going to do is we're going to do this in a metaverse. It's going to be a digital twin. So we're going to not actually bring competitors to Forsyth, do this in the metaverse, but if you had this technology, what could you build on top of it? Did I answer your question?
You started to. I was wondering if there was a time. When you plan, and how could they get involved? What's the?
I have to get through. We were hoping to do it by December, but this is taking to get through these legality issues. We got a meeting next week. We think that'll be the last one, and then once we get through that, once I have to get through that, but I'm thinking right now it's going to be March. So.
Sometime first quarter.
Yeah.
And is there a website or anything for them to?
Not yet. No, we're
just email you.
I mean, the reality is, if Forsyth County doesn't go for it, then we don't have a competition.
Okay, so you're not quite there.
So we're we're limiting our funds in any of the promotions, and I'm talking about it. It's going to happen. We'll find another place to happen, but you know.
Well, when you do get it, I guess, sold or and
Yeah.
scheduled, maybe contact Atlanta Blockchain.
Oh yeah. We want to. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna ask, have you guys heard of helium?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm actually a helium miner.
That is literally what
What do you
just
wanna
jumped
know?
in my head when you're talking about wireless communication, mesh net.
Well, I mean, that's why I pulled my phone up. There was no mobile app economy until this phone was. He's got this. That's a perfect example because, I mean, it kind of looks like it, you know? But the compute power in this is well, actually, it's unlimited in respects because you can just keep adding to it. But this is a data center at an intersection.
So essentially, it's kind of like two questions. It's kind of like a layer one protocol, almost kind of like Ethereum, or even maybe a layer zero if it's able to communicate with other products that are similar. But it feels like it's kind of like a layer one where you can build these different apps on top of it. Because the first thing that came to mind was like each person in here, you could have your own like Uber app or your own rideshare app. You know what I mean? To where you can have smart contracts where GPS is involved with whatever that technology is, to where you can get paid by the person, or your car could even get paid, right?
Sure.
And you can have a wallet for your car that then holds the money, so when you need oil changes or when you need, like, it's already, like,
Exactly.
that's crazy.
One of the use cases, and this is what I'm trying to sell to my local government officials is, you know, if we had these deployed strategically around the city of Cumming, you know, let's say we have 40 of it. Now there's been an issue with the smart cells, you know, getting traffic off the cellular network and onto the internet as quickly as possible. Well, they don't like these small cells going on top of poles. It's unattractive. Well, if you have this and you have a smart cell hidden inside here, now you've got a public address system, but because there's a revenue component to it, they could own, the city or the county could own the network and then sell it to the AT&Ts and the Comcast instead of giving franchise fees. They can own it and share in the revenue.
And make money off advertising.
That's where the revenue would come from. So this is not a capital expense because these start out 40, 50,000
Oh, yeah.
easily.
Yeah.
It's an expensive iPhone.
But and I'll let Eric talk about this, but from the county or the city municipality government standpoint, it's not a capital expense, it's a revenue source.
You're making money off of it.
Yeah. Somebody shared with me today that in the city of Atlanta, there's less than 50% of the streets have sidewalks, and even the 40% of the ones that do need to be replaced. Well, what if you put these on every street and this pays for putting sidewalks into every location? And that's how you pay for it. You put infrastructure, you know, we're talking in diversity and equity and inclusion. You talk about putting something like this into an area, now you've got something that can actually build into those communities. It without raising taxes, it brings that into place.
Yeah, I think there's many use cases
Oh,
that I see flourishing from this, especially in regards to, you brought up ideas about gamification and things of that nature. Also, the validation of the information that is being pulled through those networks, right? Like, say, from the camera or whatever else, to actually, whether it's, an oracle that you all build on your own blockchain, or, and I guess that's a more meaningful question to ask, is like, what position are you all taking on that in regards to blockchains? Are you all preparing to be your own blockchain? Are you hosting on a particular blockchain, or more so taking a blockchain agnostic or multi-chain stance on how you feed forward with this?
All the above.
Fair answer. We've got several Web3 strategies. One is we're working with several layer one blockchains. Ethereum would be one. Smart contracts is a huge part of our business, right? Even before Web3, smart contracts are really germane to how we set up shop in any venue. So with a municipality, we enter into what's called a public-private partnership. And that's effectively a legal construct that allows private funding as well as public funding, like grant funding, tax dollars, what have you, to work together to create a commercially and economically sustainable project over a project term or a contract term. So advertising is a great revenue stream for us to harness and to help fund projects like this. But that legal construct I just spoke of has everybody here I'm sure is familiar with the term smart contract. There's effectively a fiduciary contract set up within those that it just simply manages the cash flow. So revenue streams come in to you'll hear the top of the funnel, the top of the waterfall, advertising revenue, cellular or Wi-Fi connectivity propagation revenue, selling connectivity backhaul to connected devices that need to reach the internet, and then edge computing revenue. So think no different than Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure. This is cloud, but it's micro cloud at the edge.
Right.
So those three revenue streams flow in. You've got to have a way to distribute those cash flows to agreed upon parties. So we're one of those parties. We're a service provider, and we're an integrator. So we are certainly party to that cash flow. We also have partnerships that get part of that cash flow because they're performing a service that generates revenue. Advertising sales would be an example. The municipality is a recipient or benefactor of that cash flow, and there's again, very smart contract look and feel fiduciary mechanism within that legal construct we've created so that the city, who's given public right-of-way, access, support, likely access to government agencies that will then use this, they're a huge benefactor of the top line revenue streams as well. So what we've created in that is a term you may hear somewhat frequently called a circular economy, where instead of partnering with a large centralized institution to provide these services and to charge for them and be a very singular source, we've created a partnership with the venue and with the community. This scotches through DEI out there, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a huge theme in what municipal communities are looking to garner with this treasure trove of value by way of real estate. But then how do you really lift all the boats? How do you raise the tide across the entire community? And setting up these public-private partnerships and that legal construct, it flows so seamlessly with the nature of blockchain and smart contracts. We talked a little bit about removing middlemen earlier. And so sometimes middlemen or women have a very valuable place in the economic supply chain. Sometimes they're adding bloat, to it, and they're harming the people at one end of the spectrum or the other. Advertising is a great example of where incentivization of people to opt in to advertising.
Right.
It's an advertiser's dream. They want to know who I am. How much money do I make? Where do I like to shop? How many kids do I have? What kind of car do I drive? Et cetera, because it makes me a much more valuable persona for brand activation to reach. This is why Facebook and Google and others are worth what they're worth, because they provide a mechanism for brands to efficiently achieve that. But the users themselves, and you hear a lot of people feeling very intruded upon and say, look, I don't like that, and why don't I like it? Well, probably because I'm not really benefiting from it so much. Someone else's gain is really off of me. Blockchain is one of those things, Helium's a great example, where you're incentivized to participate in the growth and expansion of a network. Mm-hmm. And as that incentivization comes with tokens. This chimes into where we play. So this would be, in effect, us participating as a layer 2, where we have an infrastructure token across our 3 domains of display, compute, and connectivity. And as our partners, in this case, a municipality being the real estate, is participating with us, they're gaining equity effectively in the deliverable, which again, similar to Helium, is intended to flip from being just a pure incentivization model to being a platform utility, where you have real commercial utility being transacted over a really public people's network, if you will, built out edge infrastructure.
So I would imagine something of this scale, and especially when you're taking into consideration the municipality, public access, cameras, people's visual persona, as well as, license plates of cars, like personal identifying factors, there's going to be a large proponent of privacy and security that has to be entangled with
100%.
this particular system.
That's why I couldn't answer his question is when we're gonna do this, because
Right.
that's what I'm dealing with right now.
Got you. And I imagine that something of this scale would take 10 to 15 years to actually truly like flow through when it comes to like crystallization of the byproduct, like actually seeing what this could look like in its grandest vision. And it's not to say that it can't happen quicker, but this is just in my mind what it would take. So a couple of things that I wanted to mention, because I know previously you had asked about dApps and things of that nature, and that's a cool case. But one, I want to ask about what would it look like for other blockchains who host nodes within those servers itself, and then also, what have you all looked into the? You mentioned oracles as well, right? Have you heard of Flare Network, which is a decentralized oracle network that's coming up? Of course, there's Chainlink. Of course, there's a couple of others, Go plugin on the XDC network and some others. But I would imagine that oracles would play a heavy part in this. And then
Huge.
also the Nillion network. Have you heard of the Nillion network? This is, I've mentioned it to some of the ABC members here. They've heard me talk about it. It's relatively new in its emergence. However, they have effectively created a cybersecurity model that enhances or goes beyond traditional encryption. So it might be something to look into, because they are effectively saying that they have solved the issue of being able to relate private information on a public blockchain. So that might be something worth looking into.
So, to me, because of the smaller technology, I mean, think of a server right now, just how the technology is getting smaller, and this takes so little space. You can grow this, so it's infinite. To me, the way I would position the competition to you guys is, the only reason I'm doing the competition is I want to crowdsource ideas.
Right.
That's what Talking Traffic Lights was. Is GDOT gave me the data that they were using when they were doing this pilot program. So we offered it to 9 teams, took up on the challenge. They were win. Here's something I didn't mention. The last competition, $75,000 was the carrot, if you will, but it wasn't cash. It was $75,000 that went toward developing that app with GDOT. So the winning idea actually gets to create their app with GDOT. That's what we're doing again, is we've got GDOT. They've given us a use case, but really it's the carrot is you get to develop this with GDOT. But I don't like to talk about use cases, because the whole purpose of the competition is to crowdsource ideas, because I used to be a business analyst, and a business analyst, you would have to communicate between the developers and the customer. Well, to me, I use the competition as a way, because, and this, I'm not saying this is a slight towards traffic engineers, but they're not technologists. They don't know what the technology can do at its outer limits. And when I'm talking about outer limits, I'm talking about blockchains and AI and IoT. Because, and I know this because I know their developers. They're still building apps on C++ and really old technology, because that's just the way governments operate.
Yeah.
What we did with the previous Talking Traffic Lights, governments will not buy emerging technologies because it's too risky. And again, I don't mean this in a negative way, but it's hard for them to go out and spend $500,000, $1 million on something that hasn't been tested.
Yeah.
The competition broke that ceiling, because I had GDOT engineers sitting within the judging panel to get to see the technology. The winning idea was an AI solution. So the competition became a model for government and entities to purchase safely emerging technologies.
I like it.
So we're using it, and I go back and just to state my point, using the competition as a way to crowdsource ideas, because we're not limited by space, because he can make these a little bit bigger, but we're only limited by our imagination as to what apps. That's why I use this. I pulled this out so I could take this as an analogy. I mean, there's still every day there's apps being created.
It's another wide open field.
Exactly.
It really is.
Exactly.
Talk about crowdsourcing ideas. You make me think of the Ways app.
Yeah.
So I do think we're at our hour. Do we have time for one more question, or
Yeah, one more question. Then.
one more question, maybe?
Yeah, work out.
If there is one more question. You answered it. That's a lot of.
Kind of practical for me. I'm not a technology guy, really deep down. How robust and secure are these smart point devices? I mean, somebody kicks them, car runs into them, one goes out. Does it affect the others down the line? How does all that act? What do you anticipate in, I don't know, repair, whatever the case may be?
Sure. So they're very robust. They have a 13.5 millimeter thick double pane cover glass. It's got an IK10 impact rating. Layman term would be it can withstand a 22 caliber bullet. Baseball bat 2x4. Doesn't do well with like a ball pin hammer or something that brings a lot of force to a point. But they're very resilient. We have tens of thousands of these deployed around the world as just pure play digital signage structures. And so we're used to abuse, and we've learned a lot along the way. And then from a physical intrusion standpoint, if you were to pry one open or gain access to it, they have over 150 different parameters that they sense, mostly performance parameters, but they do have a pneumatic sensor to sense a pressure differential change, which would indicate it had been open. We have a humidity sensor, which also provides another point of validation that the unit had been open and the humidity inside the unit had changed. And when we do that, we can, of course, remotely lock down the compute. If one gets knocked over, hit by a bus or something, it's taken off network, they're all redundant to each other, which is inherent in a decentralized environment anyway. So you don't have a single point of failure. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I think they have to be that robust, right, to be out in that environment. So.
Yep.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, thank you all very much today, Eric and Scott, for talking about the project you got going on. Very informative.
You bet.
Thank you. And if you guys want to learn any more about what they're doing, or you want to talk about use cases in supply chain, then please feel free. You can email me. I think you're going to get contact information to Atlanta Blockchain. Follow us on different social media. But thank you all very much for spending the hour with us, and I think we'll be around in another half hour if you want to talk. Thank you.
You get my picture?
Huh?
Did you get my picture?